February 27th, 2026. Donald Trump's war room. At 3:38 Eastern Time, the president orders a strike on Iran.
As dawn crept up across the Central Command AOR, the skies surged to light. More than 100 aircraft launched from land, sea, fighters, tankers, airborne early warning, electronic attack, bombers from the States and unmanned platforms, forming a single synchronized wave.
The attackers send back positions, images, and radio signals, which are instantly processed and analyzed by artificial intelligence. Within hours, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is killed by an Israeli strike.
The United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it. There's never been a military like we possess, and frankly, there's nobody even close, but we are now using that military for good.
The strike against Khamenei was successful because the Israelis knew exactly where to find him. In the preceding months, artificial intelligence had also been deployed to analyze vast troves of satellite, signals, and human intelligence. The strikes against Iran and before that Venezuela are just the latest and most vivid demonstration of how we're in the midst of a once-in-a-generation transformation of the technology of war.
Is an inflection point. It's going to change our processes, it's going to change the way we fight, our operating systems. So you're watching all that play out. And whoever figures it out first will have an advantage. This is about winning, right? Winning. We can't forget our job is to win.
The transformation has been building for decades as computers became more powerful, giving rise to AI, and more compact, allowing for swarms of lethal drones. This is a film about the development of these new war machines and how they're already being used by Israel, Ukraine, and by the United States.
The most important thing is to ensure that we in the West, broadly defined, have the most powerful versions of this technology and continue to do so.
Will this new technology make war more precise, reducing collateral damage, and even preventing conflict altogether by deterrence? Or might it simply make wars cheaper, more frequent, and ever more brutal?
When you rely on AI, you need less people to ground you, and people can tell themselves a beautiful story on the most precise war ever. And they don't have to speak to anyone that will face them with the fact that they're just killing families and with no actual solution in the near future.
Bavaria, southern Germany. 7,000 US and NATO troops are preparing to act in case Russia invades a NATO country. They're racing to learn how to use this new technology on the battlefield.
12990.
12990.
This is the headquarters of an army formation of about 1,000 soldiers.
Sir, there is no change to combat power, location, or arraignment of our forces.
There it is.
All right, cool. Let's have a Loctite plan to get all our replacements and our vehicles out to the front. So
10 miles away, more NATO troops, acting as an advancing enemy.
The big picture of what we're doing here is we're exercising our brigades and our battalion's ability to do a combined arms fight against an enemy that has near or peer threats against us. We're starting to see the indicators and warnings that the enemy is about to try to break through our lines using assault maneuver fires.
You are experiencing gas non-persistent for 4-hour duration.
We have a chemical attack, so tape. I need tape. Where'd you take that?
If you look at any of the exercises, any of the experimentation that we're doing, clearly it's leading to make sure that we have the right capability, in particular along the eastern flank.
This is the command center for NATO and the US Army. Any land war against Russia will be orchestrated from here. The commanding general is Chris Donahue. He led much of the technological innovation in the US Army and is now in charge of all US soldiers in Europe.
It's our job to make sure that Europe and everyone that's part of Europe remains safe, remains secure, and that we live up to what NATO expects us all to do.
Donahue was an early adopter of the idea that wars can be won or lost not only because of the strength of the armies, but also because of how much information can be gathered and analyzed.
If you can truly harness the right data, have the right processes, you can really come up with a distinct advantage.
And what is that advantage?
You have to outthink, outdecide, outact, and then do that multiple times.
What's innovative is that this command center has access to all information from the battlefield through a single network of computers called Maven that supports all US and NATO operations.
On MSS, put something on there, keep people out of Hawk Hill.
These screens deliver the picture through Maven Smart Systems, which takes in multiple different streams of data that operators are looking at and analyzing and giving me the recommendations or their understanding of what they've seen on the battlefield.
I think the first thing with Maven Smart Systems is it gives us the ability to take classified of all type, unclassified, and then commercial data, and you can aggregate it all together to help you make all the decisions that you have to in warfare.
Underpinning Maven is artificial intelligence.
Maven Smart Systems is a battle command system tool. We're starting now to use a lot of different machine learning or computer vision models to help, especially with imagery or videos. For example, you can have a computer vision model that's looking specifically for tanks. To do that, you have to take thousands of images of tanks and you train the model to look for those. So what you do is you take a picture of a tank and you draw a box around the tank and you tell the computer, this is a tank. And you do that 1,000 times. Now, when you feed an image to that model, it's going to tell you, yes, this is a tank, or no, it's not.
Once the computer has flagged an image where it suspects it's detected a tank, for instance, we don't just action that immediately, right? That's when we would take it to our human analysts and say, hey, can you confirm or deny that this was properly classified? What the AI is doing, it's not replacing the human, but it's enabling them to do their job faster so we can process more and more data and identify targets quicker and solve problems faster.
55907. It's a
BMP stationary, over.
AI is helping glean what's important, what's useful, what's not useful, so I can say friendly or foe, or target or not. The enemy has the same capability, so I have to be quicker. I have to be faster, otherwise I'm at risk for becoming that target.
The revolution in how wars are fought has come about not only with the processing of data, but also with small unmanned vehicles, drones.
So this drone, send up. This is your eyes in the skies to detect everybody around you. Early warning to see what's going on the battlefield.
And in addition, FPV, first-person view drones, can carry bombs.
The FPV drones, that's your strike drone. That's what's going to take everything out.
Okay, I think they're about to launch. Oh.
Two BMPs, like 200 meters from us. You can hear them driving.
The battlefield makes me move quicker and understand quicker and make decisions quicker.
I hit the rear BMP. Add one to the scoreboard.
The enemy is currently moving about a click every 2 minutes. Over.
Just spotted a vehicle in the wood line.
What's the grid?
01.
What you see is now a completely digitally data-driven unit that had all these new forms of mass, drones, unmanned systems, in there to make them as able to find the enemy, hide from the enemy, see the enemy, and kill the enemy.
Artillery incoming.
This year, Sergeant Cole has noticed that the Ukrainians are also putting AI into drones so they can fly themselves to targets.
It's just absolutely insane what they're doing. The targeting software, it'll detect like that's a person, that's a truck. The hard part is to program it to actually fly on its own and then hit something. And that comes in with like morals and ethics. Like, do we want something to decide on its own to kill something?
What's your view of that?
I mean, if it flies completely autonomously and kills stuff, I don't necessarily agree with it. Completely autonomous drones flying around killing people, that's just insanity. That's stuff out of nightmares. All right, gotta come land.
All right, we'll go ahead.
It's anyone's guess how these technologies play out in future wars. But clues already exist in Israel and Ukraine, where the technology is already in use. The trajectory of this new war machine begins in about 2016, when the technology of war was limited mostly to hardware, like aircraft carriers, artillery, and tanks. But already there were experiments in data processing, especially in Israel, a nation that promoted itself as a tech superpower.
Today, our biggest export is technology. Israeli technology which powers the world's computers, cell phones, cars, and so much more. The future belongs to those who innovate. And this is why the future belongs to countries like Israel.
Nearly 50 years after Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, some Palestinians, hemmed in by the newly built separation wall, turned to lone wolf attacks.
Short while ago here at the central bus station in Jerusalem, one terrorist carried out an attack against a security guard that was stabbed. Just outside the entrance at the moment, the area is still closed off. We've confirmed it was a terrorist attack.
These attacks were different to the previous waves, as they weren't organized by a militia organization. Instead, single Palestinians skirted round the security controls.
You just had lone individuals, usually very young. These people usually just took a knife or even a screwdriver to attack soldiers in checkpoints, or just suddenly batten people on the street, or driving cars into people.
The challenge was to try to figure out who's the random person that will wake up today, pick up a knife and stab someone.
These witnesses are intelligence analysts who were called up to work for the Israeli army. They don't want to reveal their identities, and their voices have been digitally altered. Their job was to monitor security threats in the West Bank.
I was recruited to the army in the late 2010s. In the theoretical framework that I worked under, every Palestinian is a suspect. When I joined the army, it was in the midst of a technological transformation of trying to adopt new technologies.
Israel had a special advantage in tracking the threat. It controlled Palestinian communications.
Israel has basically unlimited data because all stellar data of the West Bank goes through Israeli technological centers.
The whole network is basically in Israel's hands. All phone calls that are being made through the regular network in the West Bank and Gaza, they would all go to a big database, sort of archive. These lone wolf attacks, they naturally encourage the army to think in terms of big data. The traditional approach of just, trying to infiltrate a terrorist organization, this wouldn't really work for people who just spontaneously decide to attack Israelis.
At first, Israel tried simple word search to catch lone wolf militants before they attacked.
We were really doing the first steps of, for example, working with telephone calls on how to identify a relevant telephone call according to keywords.
They kind of figured out that many people who go on these lone wolf things send text message, basically. Beforehand, some kind of declaration of intent.
Certain words, whenever they are reported in the system, these words would trigger some sort of alarm.
But soon they experimented with data patterns that would predict who might merely be tempted to become a radical.
We want to create a usable data set of possible terrorists. So the general method to do it is specify as many attributes as we can. So age, gender, and try to find patterns in the data that can be used to squeeze it.
Thousands of individual Palestinians were categorized by dozens of attributes, and every attribute was given a value. A computer then calculated how likely each person was to turn violent.
The initial algorithms created grades as to predictability to be terrorist for 1 to 10. You're a 7.8 terrorist, and here's the group of potential terrorists. Now let's surveil them on a daily basis to see which of them is actually planning to do terror.
At some point, these attacks are reduced significantly. It was pretty efficient. I remember that I was almost shocked to see how efficient it was. They did feeling quite emboldened by this.
אבל במהלך השנה האחרונה מנענו למעלה מ-400 פיגועים ודאיים. זה פעילות צבאית. פעילות צבאית שמבוססת על מודיעין משוכלל ביותר, בדרכים משוכללות ביותר.
Although Israel's military leadership was convinced that the decline in attacks was due to prediction technology, human rights groups reckon the waves of violence had always ebbed and flowed. And they accused Israel of an egregious invasion of the privacy of millions of Palestinians.
To me, it was very clear that this total control is precisely what enables the political process to be frozen. Clearly, if we have that total control, then there's no motivation to change anything. We really thought that technology has solved most of our problems.
While Israel concentrated more of its intelligence resources on technology, they neglected the role of human sources, particularly in the Gaza Strip. This had been an essential part of Israeli intelligence in the past. And it would prove to be a catastrophic error in the lead up to the Hamas attack of October the 7th, 2023. The next chapter in the story of warfare technology began when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine in February 2022.
Шановні громадяни України, Сьогодні вранці президент Путін оголосив проведення спеціальної військової операції на Донбасі. Росія здійснила удари по нашій військовій інфраструктурі та по нашим прикордонникам, прикордонним загонам.
Це страна-агресор, це страна-паразит, це Росія, це зло.
The odds were stacked against Ukraine, who had 250,000 soldiers, but stood against an army of about 1 million.
Дети прячутся. За что наши дети будут? Ну вот так вот страдают.
Україна не може жити в війні, тому що ми знаходимося в Європі, знаходимося в 21 сторіччі. Перемога може бути в дипломатичному форматі, паралельно з бойовими кроками нашої армії.
The challenge that Zelensky had in fighting back was working out which Russian targets to hit. From the command center in Germany, NATO offered assistance in the form of Maven smart systems, though the US military won't talk about what help was given. But the technology behind Maven smart systems was created by a controversial company called Palantir. Their CEO was and is a maverick skier called Alex Karp.
Welcome to our...
Here he is, speaking to investors in the early months of the Ukraine war.
Palantir, for example, we are a company to thrive in good times, and we thrive in bad times. We are going to continue supplying the world's most important products to the most interesting, creative, and effectual people in the world. Palantir's products are on the absolute front line, and you see them in the news every day.
Palantir's early investor was the CIA, and they have contracts with global national security organizations, including US immigration. Their next customer was to be Zelensky.
The invitation came from the Ukrainians. So Alex Karp, our chief executive and founder, and I traveled to Kiev May, June of 2022. I remember we woke up very early in Rzeszów on the Polish side of the border. It was dawn at 4 a.m. and set off on a very long car journey across that eastern border of Poland into Ukraine, and then 8 hours on the road to Kiev. We turned up at the appointed place to meet Zelensky. What was extraordinary about that meeting was, frankly, how lively he was. He was very funny. He was cracking jokes. And I mean, I guess I know he's a comedian, but still, that was a very surprising and unexpected thing. You know, there was a couple of times he had us in stitches. I think Zelensky understood that the biggest challenge the Ukrainians faced was one of mass and numbers. They were outnumbered by the Russians and also outgunned. They had more armaments, more industrial capacity than Ukrainians did. And so the only way of correcting that imbalance was with technology. And Zelensky explained that he wanted us to come and help the Ukrainian war effort, and that he believed that Ukraine was going to be the research and development laboratory for conflict over the coming years. So, of course, Alex said yes, and then it fell to me and others on the Palantir team to turn that into a reality. We provided them with a software platform called Foundry, and at its core, it's a data integration platform. So that's to say it enables our customers to bring together data, information from really any source of any type, any format, any scale, bring that data together, clean it, harmonize it, and make it useful. In military technology terms, in a war like the one that Ukraine faced, there were many, many more targets, many, many more things to shoot at than they had things to shoot with. So the big challenge was not precision, it was prioritization. And that is a data integration problem. So at the beginning of the war, for example, there was lots of satellite imageries. And satellite imagery is very good at telling you where something is. but it's often very hard to tell what the thing is or why the thing might be important. So you can identify a barn in a field in Ukraine, but you're not going to be able to tell from the satellite image that that barn might be the command and control center for an important part of Russian forces. And for that, you might need to layer on another kind of data. For example, radio frequencies, signals intelligence. So if you combine satellite imagery and signals intelligence, you can tell where something is and what it is. And that allows you to then, with the precision munitions that exist today, destroy it with pinpoint accuracy.
In November 2022, 9 months after the war began, ChatGPT burst onto the scene, showcasing the power of a new technology, large language models. Palantir and the Ukrainians were quick to harness the underlying technical breakthrough.
So the emergence of large language models in 2022 has a dramatic impact on the battlefield. If you imagine there might be thousands or even tens of thousands of different data sources that need to be monitored at any given time on a battlefield. And analysts traditionally would have had to review each of those data sources individually and manually. Large language models, as we all know, can synthesize information very quickly and can draw out important inferences, links, or key points, depending on what you're looking for. And I think that did play a critical role in those early phases of the war.
Isn't there something difficult about running a company that's speeding up the process of killing people?
Deeply morally complex, and it's something that we wrestle with every day. But ultimately, I think ensuring that our armed forces have the most effective technology is actually the best way of preserving peace and therefore saving lives.
But AI wasn't the only technology to take a huge leap forward in Ukraine. Also fast-tracked was the development of unmanned vehicles. 2 Ukrainian soldiers describe how drones have transformed the battlefield.
На початку застосування дронів було виключно для коригування артилерії і для ведення розвідки.
They may have started as tools of surveillance, but soon became deadly weapons.
Ну, це вже FPV-дрон, але зі скидом. Тобто він працює як бомбер. Тобто у нього поворотна камера і скид. Ну, скидає там приблизно отакі от боєприпаси.
By 2024, each side had more than 1 million drones.
Це ні для кого не секрет, що десь відсотків, напевно, 70 вражень є дронами. Ну, коли в тебе є, скажімо, ракета ПЗРК, яка коштує $60,000, є дрон, який коштує $2,000. І враження, в принципі, на рівні.
With a range of up to 30 kilometers, they transformed the front line.
Так що війна дуже сильно змінилась за рахунок дронів. Тепер техніка майже не під'їжджає до переднього краю. Та, яка під'їжджає, зазвичай дуже швидко уражається. Лініями нашими і ворожими дуже сильно збільшуються через те, що майже будь-який дрон дістає до передніх позицій.
Автомат! Автомат!
Ukraine demonstrated that the fundamental character of war has changed, with drones killing hundreds of thousands of soldiers.
Тому що зараз в середньому кожних 3-5 хвилин на ділянці фронту висить як мінімум 1 дрон. Відчуття, коли за тобою постійно стежать, морально тисне. Тому що ти розумієш, що куди б ти не пішов і що б ти не зробив, рано чи пізно тебе знайдуть.
Бігом!
These new technologies of AI and drones had allowed a smaller army to hold ground, albeit in a brutal and intractable fight. But soon these technologies would be used in Gaza with devastating consequences. The next development in the new war machine began when hundreds of Hamas operatives breached Israel's high-tech border at dawn on October the 7th, 2023. Social media quickly revealed the brutality of the attack.
I was in my apartment in Jerusalem, just me and one of my flatmates. And I got up in the morning from all the sirens.
Like almost every Israeli, I have family closer to the border with Gaza. And at these moments, there were actual fear for their lives. I didn't know what's going on with them.
For me, and I guess for many other people, it was more like from the collective level of, you know, it's if people like me that were attacked, it could have been me.
In a matter of hours, 1,200 Israelis were killed. 251 hostages were taken to Gaza. The Israeli military and political response was immediate.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה. לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה. במקביל הוריתי לבצע גיוס מילואים נרחב ולהשיב מלחמה שערה בעוצמה ובהיקף שהאויב לא הכיר.
The three intelligence analysts who were witness to the tech development around Lone Wolves now returned to duty.
Once you arrive over there to the unit, I mean, of course, you sit in front of a computer. It's not as if you're able to stop the attack from there, but you can't feel like, okay, I do my part.
The whole atmosphere was like pretty insane, and I don't know, no one really knew what they were doing, I suppose. Like, originally they kind of thought they could like wipe out from us in the, because it's like the space of like a few days, and then we just have like the easy win, supposedly, and like get on with our lives.
In the first few days of the war, the biggest tasks were creating what's called targets.
The creation of targets was a challenge because the Israeli government said it followed international law, in which a strike would be prohibited when the expected incidental loss of civilian life is excessive in relation to the direct military advantage.
There were complaints that there aren't enough targets in the Gaza Strip, even before the war. People high up were very content with the amount of targets that were being produced.
They set up this thing called the target factory. Then they were like, okay, we just need to make targets. Just finding locations and finding people, basically, to assassinate.
5, 4, 2, 1, מעולה.
The Israeli Air Force posted multiple videos of their strikes and the numbers of their targets on their Telegram channel.
There was an urge for extreme measures. So the general belief was that human work will not do to create the number of targets required. So the convenient solution was to use non-human ways of creating targets, which is namely AI.
It was already clear that we have to bomb as much as we can. No realistic amount of humans could do this job in this amount of time. Then naturally they turned to machines.
Computers created lists of locations and people that were passed to target rooms. There, other soldiers checked the targets were correct, assessed the collateral damage, and it's reported that sometimes they had less than a minute to make this decision.
Early on, it was very clear that anything that has any connection with Hamas, and that includes also people who are not part of the military wing, but also part of the political wings, anyone who has a connection with Hamas is a legitimate target.
سكننا في شقة على الطابق الرابع. فجأة الساعة 4 تقريبا الصاروخ نزل علينا ومش عارفين ليش. فقدت أبوي وأخوي فقدت عمي وابن عمي وبنت عمي والنسايب الاثنين ومرتي حامل وأنا الناجي الوحيد.
How did the Israeli army generate so many targets? In the preceding years, the Israelis had built targeting systems that had been derived from the software used to prevent lone wolf attacks.
At some point, we were using an AI algorithm that gets a data set of people who are approved Hamas members and looks for people with similar attributes in general data sets of the entire Palestinian population.
There were a number of different systems. One ascribed a threat probability to any individual between 1 and 100. Anyone over a threshold of, say, 90 could be targeted.
If your requirement is to kill in numbers, you want to kill an impressive number of people, AI can give you theoretically an endless number as long as you're willing to give up on the precision.
Within 3 weeks, Israel announced it had attacked 11,000 targets. And the Gaza Health Ministry, controlled by Hamas, had reported 8,800 dead and 22,000 injured.
It was perfectly clear that we want this space of targeting with this level of collateral damage.
Allahu Akbar! But in the end, what drove the high number of casualties was not technology, but political and military choices. In the previous rounds of violence, the number of civilian casualties deemed acceptable by the Israeli military had been much lower. A different decision was made for Gaza in 2023.
They have this decision at the start of the war that you can bomb any Hamas operative anywhere he is and take 20 people along with him. Basically assassinating people in the homes. This means that you know that people not only have killed wives, children. Israel basically took the license to kill a significant number of civilian casualties along with a target. Basically, you're right, yeah, he's there, boom.
These intelligence analysts accuse Israel of allowing collateral damage of 20 civilians for any approved target. But they go further.
There are actual numbers in Israeli military doctrine for each level of collateral damage which is allowed. I think they raised a base level, and then for especially important targets, it could be even higher. So there was permission to kill 300 people as collateral damage. Yeah.
300 innocent victims for an approved target? On the 2nd of December 2023, the Israelis appear to reinforce the claim. They launched more than 400 strikes, and one on a housing block in Gaza City, where they said they'd eliminated a Hamas commander who'd helped plan the October 7th massacre. But in doing so, the strike had killed an estimated 300 neighbors.
مربع سكني مكون من أكثر من 50 منزل في هذا المربع تم استهدافه بأكثر من 10 قنابل. أعداد كبيرة من الشهداء لا زالوا تحت الأنقاض.
I remember there was this operation where other innocent people were killed. I listened to the call beforehand of the guy saying, yeah, I'm in my family home, and my whole family are here, and I'm worried that we will get bombed, and my family would die. And then I'm like just sitting there, it's like 4 a.m, waiting for like the fucking planes to bomb. This kind of bureaucratic apparatus takes like the personal responsibility of people, and you don't see the face of people of you like killing, you know. But the weird thing is that I did hear these people's voices, you know. And I was like, it's horrible to say this, but, you know, I heard them crying when their relatives were killed.
I think a lot of what technology gives us is that it blurs the reality for us to be able to not be completely responsible for what's going on.
The decision was just to bomb and bomb and bomb. If you want this space of bombings and still make them look legal, let's call it that, then you need at least this tool that does the combination of data to reach the legal threshold for what is a legitimate target. In this sense, this kind of technology is more of an excuse.
All 3 intelligence analysts are no longer on duty in the Israeli army. By January 2026, an Israeli official briefed newspapers that they agreed there had been more than 70,000 deaths in strikes in the 2 years of the war. Organizations including Amnesty International, B'Tselem, and parts of the UN now accuse Israel of committing war crimes by, amongst other things, the disproportionate attacks on civilians in densely populated areas. Whilst Israel's strategy was driven by human choices, the technology enabled the onslaught. The Israel Defense Force says the IDF does not use an AI system that identifies terrorist operatives or tries to predict whether a person is a terrorist. Information systems are merely tools for analysts in the target identification process. The IDF operates in accordance with international law. Each strike undergoes an individualized case-by-case assessment evaluating anticipated military advantage against expected incidental civilian harm. Proportionality decisions are made based on the information available at the time of decision and not in hindsight. The IDF has also said that the 70,000 deaths figure does not reflect official IDF data. Whatever the lessons of the tactics in Gaza and Ukraine, the race for warfare technology shows no sign of slowing down. In January 2026, the US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, was fully committed.
Simply put, the United States must win the strategic competition for 21st century technological supremacy. We must ensure that America's military AI dominance, so that no adversary can exploit that same technology to hold our national security interests or our citizens at risk. America first in every domain. In short, we will win this race by becoming an AI-first warfighting force across all domains.
The rest of the world is following suit. Western governments have entered into hefty military contracts with American-based technology companies like Palantir, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, making them ever more dependent on a few corporations for the next generation of military technology.
I think it's incredibly important if we want to maintain our way of life, if we want to remain advanced first world economies, if we want to keep our value system, that we in the West, broadly defined, have the dominant militaries. We have to maintain that technological advantage. And if we are in an arms race, that means we have to win it.
As drones replace missiles and computers replace men, it seems that wars have not become cleaner, more surgical and quicker. If anything, the costs in money and political capital of entering wars has declined, and they're likely to become more frequent. So now is the moment for citizens and their governments to decide whether, just like for nuclear and biological weapons, we need international agreements to control the new warfare.
I got to see the advantages that AI gives a few years before the rest of the public, and there's zero good value given by that. It only creates more dust. It only gives opportunity for deadlier wars. To be fair, I really think it's a mistake. It just creates more dust and more wars.
Що будь-яка війна, вона спричиняє рост технологій, рост інновацій. Хто перший і хто буде перший застосовувати оці інновації, той і виграє війну.
Готов до роботи!
Unreported World returns with a new series beginning with the women risking their livelihoods and reputations, pushing boundaries on screen in Nigeria's prolific but highly conservative male-dominated film industry. That's next Friday at 7:30 here on Channel 4.